Ever since we began Anita's Attic and we started organizing the graduation events, it also seemed like an ideal opportunity to be able to combine the attic lecture with the graduation event. In the years before, various people have talked or delivered the attic lecture, and they have included writers, people from the publishing industry, graphic artists, sports writers, so the gamut of writers that who have delivered the attic lecture are ranging from people who, to me, have managed to find that magic spot of being able to combine what they love and their ability and their felicity with words to create pieces of art that I believe will have an enduring value no matter how many years goes past. In 2019, I read this brilliant book called Anatomy of Hate by Revati Lal. And Revati Lal is actually, I think, a writer who has inspired me to look at my own social conscience more carefully than I have ever done before. After I've read Anatomy of Hate, I could no longer be the writer who could live removed from the world that I am part of. All through my writing career, I've always tried to kind of, reflect reality in my writing. But it always began with an idea that was more metaphysical than anything else. And these ideas are what eventually became my pieces of literary fiction. When I started writing crime, I realized that crime allows me to make social commentary. But somewhere deep within me, I still kept thinking that, my writing, does it have a purpose beyond that of being art for art's sake? And it was around that time that I read Revati Lal's Anatomy of Hate. And I knew suddenly that my writing could no longer be removed from the world we inhabit. It could no longer, be in denial of the issues that plague not just India, but humanity itself. And also, I couldn't, draw a convenient veil over things that would, bother me, but somehow I didn't want to pursue it. Thanks to Revati and her Anatomy of Hate, I think the writer in me became someone who's more actively conscious of what her words can do and what her words can achieve. And so it gives me great, great pleasure to bring in Revati Lal to deliver the Attic Lecture for 2022. Revati Lal is a very well-known journalist and an independent filmmaker, and she's always been, I think, someone who has always stood up for what is right, and to be able to do so without sermonizing or polarizing is a rare ability. And so I'm so looking forward to listening to Revati, and the talk is appropriately titled The Anatomy of Hate.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Anita's Attic. I'm Revati Lal, and I'm the author of a book called The Anatomy of Hate. Nothing to smile about, really. But basically, I want to talk to you about what is obvious the environment that we live in India is something that we all know. We all know that we are engulfed by this sort of voluminous, like big fat monster called hate. But when it becomes so large, it also becomes very difficult to actually see what it is. It also becomes boring. It also becomes repetitive, and it becomes something that we just like to switch off from and say, okay, let me just bake some bread and let me go to sleep and toss over and not think about what we're surrounded by. And like you, I have also been exactly in that place. And then I said that, there have been many decades in this cycle of hate that we've seen in India. And if we go back to the modern origins of it, then we could chart it to the destruction of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya in 1992. And then exactly 10 years later, there are these mobs that fan out across the state of Gujarat in about 16 to 18 districts. That's more than half of the state of Gujarat is engulfed by these anti-Muslim mobs. And then we go one decade later and we come to the Delhi riots. So every decade there has been something or the other. Not a decade later, 2 decades, almost 2 decades later. But what we're seeing in this meantime is that from the time that a mosque was destroyed, this idea that there is the other has sort of captured the imagination of not just the fringes, but of so many of us, that it made me sort of think about what is it that is this that is exciting about this. Let me stop. Like, I've got fed up of just saying, oh, this is again and again and again we're repeating ourselves by talking about it in one way or the other in the newspapers. A mosque is destroyed, people are lynched, mobs go out, and then there are these phantasmagorical stories of how the Muslims are coming to get us and the Hindus must band together. And then there are these reams that all of us write about, how this is fake news, how this is fake history, until even these words start to sound like repetitive, almost like non-words. And so I said, okay, let's see how we can unpack, or how I can unpack all of this. Otherwise, I'm guilty of also kind of falling into the voyeurism of this, almost as if I want to consume more and more of this until I don't want to consume anything. It's sort of like the kind of like blindness that I wanted to get out of. And of course, one way of it is one part of it was that I was asking myself this question of how to deal with this. But the other thing is that sometimes the story comes at you by accident, and when you've asked a question and you leave it out there, sometimes the answer falls into your lap without your meaning to. So there was like a sometimes when you're trying to write something, you don't know you're trying to write something, you just ask a question and leave it out there, and then the answer comes to you when you least expect it. And I'm going to explain what that means, because I think that for me is the most fascinating part about writing from fact, not as opposed to fiction, but as a way, as a process of trying to understand the world. It's very exciting when you kind of ask something and then the answer sort of comes to you. And I said, how do we deal with this politics of hate? And at that particular point of time, I was reporting from sort of like the belly of the beast, which was Gujarat, where just the year before I had gone there to report as a television journalist, there had been these mobs that had fanned out all across the state. And I was asking myself, okay, why is it that most of the Hindu middle class in Gujarat is actually telling me that you will not understand why we support the mob, what it is about the mob, that what it is about this sort of politics that we like. And I said, yes, I don't understand what it is. And then I asked myself, isn't that what one should look at? What is it that makes this hate so attractive? And instead of focusing one's attention and storytelling on the victims, I decided to try and ask myself, how does one tell the story of the perpetrators and their supporters? And if we don't do that, aren't we condemning ourselves to never understanding where this hate comes from and therefore repeating it endlessly? But having asked myself that question for a very long time, I didn't have the answer. I didn't know what to do with that question. And I moved back from Gujarat to Delhi, where I was originally from, feeling like I had failed to answer this question. And then the answer fell into my lap by accident when I came across a man who I renamed Pranav in my book, who became the first of three protagonists of my story, who actually answered this question: how do you talk to perpetrators, try and get inside their heads, try and understand where this hate comes from, without othering them, without telling them, oh, I'm here to look at the vermin that you are, I'm here to change you. And they'll be like, who are you? Fuck off. I don't want to know you. And what makes you think you're superior to me? And they would be right in saying that, coming from where they come from. So I said, how does one get inside that space without it being a wall? And then I met this man called Pranav by accident, who was someone who was a young student at that time after the mob violence in Gujarat. He was a young student. He was finishing a master's in liberal arts when the mobs fanned out all across the state, and some of the people from these pogroms also came to his hostel where he was studying and told him and his friends, oh, there's these Muslim shops are going to be we are going to attack them, so you can come to this place between this time and this time, and you can steal, you can take free shoes, but this is your window of opportunity from time this to time this. After that, the police will swoop in, so you better get out of there before that. And his friends were like, we have to go, yeah, this is very exciting. Now, he, to quote him at that point of time, the time that I met him, shortly after he did do this, he said, at that point of time, Gujarat was cut into two even halves. The half that was being cut and killed, which was the Muslims, and the half that was out celebrating. And he said, I was with the half that was out celebrating. And then he said, um, he after the riots finished and he went out celebrating and looking at these abandoned shops and going along with his friends, he was an upper caste, educated, English speaking young man. And his master's finished, and now he was looking for a job. And if you had done a liberal arts degree, then the only place where you can get a job where you'll earn a decent enough salary, a middle class salary, was in the NGO sector, which had just started to open up in the state of Gujarat, because the year before these mobs fanned out across and killed Muslims, there had been a massive earthquake in the state. And so there was lots of big international NGOs that had swooped in to become part of the earthquake relief. And then they stayed on, and they changed from providing earthquake to relief to riot relief to victims. So after cheering on for the death and destruction of Muslims, this man gets a job in providing relief to the very people who he hated, because that's where he found work. That's where he could earn a decent salary. So he started to work in an NGO that was providing relief to these Muslims. And initially he saw a lot of pilferage happening in this relief work. He said, oh, this vermin, they deserve this kind of thing. I was right to have participated in these riots, because look at them, they're stealing from each other even in this distress. But this is what he was telling himself, because it was very disconcerting for him now to be surrounded by Muslims every day, which are the very people that he had never had to really interact with in his life. So he could make up all these stories. He basically received them by osmosis from the family and the way he'd grown up, that, these are people who are jihadis, these are the people with 4 wives, these are the fundamentalists. Don't go near them unless you get lost somewhere. Even then, try and not ask a Muslim for directions. So he never actually interacted with them. So he could imagine whatever he was told, and there was never any need to question it. Now that his workspace was inhabited entirely by Muslims, he had no choice but to look at them closely, and he said, oh my God, these are not the people I had imagined. They're quite a lot like me. And that disturbed him, because then he had to ask himself the question, what does that make me? Am I the satanic person who wanted them dead? And he couldn't live with that thought in his head. He had sleepless nights. And when I met him, he had undergone a transformation. He had changed over from being someone who'd participated in the mob as the fringe element of the mob, as an almost fanatic. He'd now undergone a transformation and become a left liberal atheist. And I had gooseflesh when I met him. I was like, oh my God, is this even possible? And then I told myself, okay, if hate of this nature can transform, then I obviously don't understand anything about hate. And what I am doing as a writer and as a journalist is also making the hate harden by magnifying it, by imagining that it is something that's fixed. Because when you describe something, you're giving those words you're giving the actual act a wrapping, and the words then sort of form the encasing of that hate. And then that hate actually becomes what we say it is. It becomes larger, it gets hardened, it gets congealed. And people who we describe like that also tell themselves, oh, well, this is what you think you are. Here, we'll give you some more of this. Because, I mean, imagine an adolescent. You tell the adolescent, you're stupid, you don't know what I'm saying, I'm telling you what's right, and you're getting their back up against the wall and you're making them defensive. So hate starts becoming like this adolescent, this defiant adolescent that then decides to magnify itself in order to exist. And in order to exist against the other that is pretending to be better than it. So the people who actually say you schmucks are actually making the schmucks schmucks. So I said, okay, this is what this man's story is telling me. So I must tell this story because it's telling me something I didn't know about hate. And then obviously I don't know anything. But when I met him, he'd undergone this transformation and it was so new to him that he was uncomfortable with letting me tell his story. So I had to pursue him for 13 years. Every year I would call him and say, hello, this is me. Can I come and talk to you? Can I interview you? Initially, he allowed me, I thought I'd make a documentary film on him. And I shot some rushes for a film. And then he thought that because he had undergone transformation, all of Gujarat would also undergo a transformation and that he would be validated by this collective transformation because we all need other people to be like us. Otherwise, we're very uncomfortable with who we are. Unfortunately, the rest of Gujarat hardened more as he was loosening up and changing his spots. And so he went into a shell and he said, lose my number, throw away these tapes. I don't want to see you anymore. So it took about 13 years for him to be comfortable to let me tell his story. But I couldn't let the story out of my head. And so I kept badgering him. And then I eventually got through to his boss. And I made his boss appeal to him and say that, look, this is an important story. And coming back to why this story was important and how this was answering my question about how to look inside the spaces of hate. I said that, okay, this man's story is giving me a way of looking inside the space of hate without othering that person, without saying, I don't like you. It's just telling his story as it is and presenting it as it is to others so that maybe large parts of middle class India, anywhere, or people who, other people in any part of the world can see this and say, okay, part of this, what this man is going through, I can understand because I've been there in some way or the other. I've looked down upon XYZ. I haven't understood XYZ. So I said that's one way of getting into this space. Having started that journey and having got a guess from him eventually after 13 years, I decided this was the outer kernel of that big, large monster of the politics of hate that we had now become. And I needed to also understand how the others in that whole spectrum, what they looked like and what made them tick. So I had to, in other words, also try and see if I could get inside the mind space of someone who committed the more heinous crimes. And that led me to looking up the lists of people who had committed some of the heinous crimes and who were put away in prison, who were serving out sentences for having cut and killed and raped Muslim women and children. And that took me to the story of somebody called Suresh Jadeja. He is somebody who bragged about his crimes publicly. You can look him up on YouTube. He's often known by a pejorative. His community has been victimized for a long time, and so he's sometimes called by the name of the tribe that he comes from. So he's sometimes called Suresh Chhara, sometimes called by his surname Suresh Jadeja, and sometimes called Suresh Langro or the man with the limp. because he had a bad leg. So you can look him up, and you will find on YouTube videos of um, a sting operation that another journalist carried out about 6 or 7 years after the 2002 Gujarat pogrom. This journalist Ashish Khaitan pretended to be a Hindu mobster in disguise, and he got many of these people to do what they would otherwise do in the normal parlance, which is to brag about their crimes. He got them to do that on camera, and that became part of the evidence that eventually put Suresh Jadeja away for 31-year jail sentence. Of course, now, like Bilkis Bano's murderers and rapists, murderers of members of her family and rapists, Suresh Jadeja is also out of jail. However, he was incarcerated and put away for crimes that he bragged about. And he said, and I quote him, I pulverized Muslim women till they were pickled. The strange thing, or apparently strange thing, was that he said that I did this while being married to a Muslim woman. That's the bit about Suresh Jadeja that I found the strangest to start with. How does a man brag about raping and killing Muslim women and children, do this while being married to a Muslim woman? And what is it like to be that woman? And what is it like to be him? How does he become the way he has? And until we can understand this, we will only look at the voyeuristic surface of this. And I found that very often, even I was guilty of, let's say, when we look at any heinous crime, we stop dead and we say, oh, okay, oh my God, this is too much to process. So I'm just going to consume the details of the terrible thing they've done and say this is undigestible and I'm going to run away from it, and then I'm going to come back and look at it at horror at the surface of it and just keep saying the horror, the horror, the horror, and I'm never going to actually go beyond that. And then I said, let me see what's inside this. Now, while he was in jail, I had to find a way of telling his story. So I talked to his wife, I talked to the woman who he was married to, the Muslim woman he was married to. And what I found strange is that after talking to his wife, the people he lived among, his relatives, his children, what I found strangest is that I could understand where he was coming from. And that's the most bewildering part of this story. And before I tell you that, I will tell you what made me think about this story was also the readings I was doing about genocides and mass crimes of hate of one community against the other from around the world, where it's easier to then see how someone like Suresh could do what he did, and how that is the bit that one must understand. For the first part of his story that interested me was not just the fact that he was married to a Muslim woman, but that he was bragging about his crimes. If he's bragging about his crimes, that means he had an audience. And that means that he had the assent, he had the approval of a large mass of people who wanted this done and who were secretly outsourcing their desire, their need to carry this out to this man who was anyway villainized and became the monster, but who was, it was safe to outsource this to him because they couldn't do this. He had the balls to do what they couldn't do but would want done. Bragging means you have this kind of an audience. And people who've written really masterly works on genocides around the world, the most important of which, in my reckoning, is political scientist called Mahmood Mamdani. He wrote a book called When Victims Become Killers, and it's about a genocide that took place in 1994, 95 in a country called Rwanda in Africa, Central Africa, where the Hutus killed, wiped out, just like the Hindus and Muslims have been at it. Over there, it's the Hutus versus the Tutsis. And about over 90,000 Tutsis were killed in a 6-month long genocide that was state sponsored. And he said, Mahmood Mamdani said, that the most troubling aspect of these kind of crimes is not the actual killing, lopping off head, raping, cutting off of babies from mothers' wombs, not the actual crime, but the popularity of it, the mass base, the mass acceptance of it. That is its most troubling aspect. That is what we need to understand. So for me, Suresh represented this mass hideosity. why is it that an entire mass of people was supporting this man who he was bragging to? So Suresh represents a large spectrum of people and their collective desires. And that's what I needed to understand. And to unpack that, then I needed to understand where he came from first. So Suresh comes from a tribe called the Charas, that is one of 180 odd tribes in India that were criminalized at birth about a century and a half ago by, guess who else? The British. When they were ruling India, they found that many nomadic tribes were troubled them because they felt that they could be couriers of information to the enemies. And after the Great Revolt of 1857 in India, they feared that they would be thrown out. And they felt that the nomadic tribes could have been the couriers of information to revolutionaries. So, shortly after 1857, a little over a decade later, in 1871, the British wrote the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, in which they said that if you were born in any of the following tribes, including the Charas, you were deemed to be a criminal at birth. So you were put in these internment camps and you were herded to do daily wage labor in buses sent there like prisoners and then put back into these internment camps after. So you weren't free. And even after India became free, India forgot about these criminal tribes for 6 years after. So the criminal tribes celebrate their independence day in terms of years, 6 years after the rest of the country because we forgot about them. Even after we struck down the Criminal Tribes Act and said that these are denotified crimes, which means that they are no longer criminals, by then they had become criminals because there was no other way that they could exist. They were usually traders. The Charas were traders, so they take stuff from one place, sell it in another. But if you're incarcerated and you're forced into labor camps, you can't do that. So you lose track of your profession, and so then they became criminals. And you could, in these, by the time that 2002, the mobs that I wrote about in my book happened, you could either be, a lawyer, a filmmaker, an actor, an educationist, someone who had gotten out of this stigma, or you could be someone who colored yourself darkly and became the local goon or the local dada, the local strong man who said, I'm here to protect you. Because if you were a chara and another person, let's say your tenant was also a chara, and the tenant wasn't paying you rent, you couldn't go to the police to complain and say, hey, listen, this person is violating the law, because you, in the eyes of the police, even though technically these tribes were no longer criminals, just like the Tyagis and many other people who were deemed to be criminal gangs, the police often victimized them continuously and continue to do so today. And so Suresh became one of these people who said, fine, if we're going to be victimized, I'm going to turn this on its head and I'm going to say, fuck you to the system. And so many of these people also they practiced this bragging about their crimes. And it was said among some of these charas that if you married someone from this community, if you wanted to marry someone, you had to prove that you went to jail at least 3 or 4 times. That was your badge of honor. So they actually read everything in reverse because they were forced to. Now, many people have gotten out of this stigma, but Suresh was one of those who fell into it deeper. This is the outer kernel of the story. However, even while one might argue that therefore this community is something that India forgot about, how come the rest of the charas weren't similarly disposed to cut and kill Muslims? How come Suresh's own brothers didn't do the same thing? So I had to search elsewhere for the rest of the pieces of the Suresh story. And what made so many people hold him up as the people who he bragged to about this? So for that, I had to look elsewhere. Now, while Suresh was becoming the local gunda, there was a reason he became the local gunda. He had a bad leg. He had polio as a child, and when you have polio, then sometimes the muscles in your leg atrophy or they don't work properly, and so you're forced to limp. So he was this kid with a bad leg that everybody made fun of. And then, to make matters worse, his own father started to disown him and would be lying around drunk in the slum that they lived in and say, oh, I don't know who my wife has slept with to produce this thing. He's not my child. And the father would talk in front of this boy who was like 4 or 5 years old. in this manner, this thing that the slut, the whore of a wife has produced, this motherfucker, this sister fucker. This is what Suresh heard about himself as a young boy. And so you see him start to exhibit hate in every possible way as the only way he could process emotions. So he started to hate himself and he started to hate everything and everyone around him. And you can see that when he starts to throw stones at his teacher in school and he gets thrown out of school. Then he starts to molest and then rape people within the sweeper down the lane in the colony that he lived in. And people were horrified, but also when they needed a strong man to get them to beat up somebody who, let's say, hadn't paid their rent, they would come to Suresh. So they hated him, they valorized him, they looked up to him, they got him to do their work, their dirty work. So this is how the local goon, the local don, sort of became this man who held up this strange sort of prism of hating himself and then hating everything and then making that a thing, making that part of his identity. And into this mix, what happens is it also becomes something where at that particular point of time in the early 1990s, um, groups like the Bajrang Dal and the VHP were looking to evangelize, to convert people to their ideas of the other and the Muslims and the danger from Muslims. And they found local leaders to capture, whose minds they could capture. And Suresh started attending these meetings. And at that precise time that he was being told that Hindu khatre mein hai, the Hindus are in danger, and watch out for Muslims, and started to distance himself from his otherwise Muslim friends in a mixed neighborhood that he lived in. His sister did the most horrible thing, according to him. She ran away and eloped with a Muslim man. And so he was horrified because it felt like this is my own family that's again letting me down by doing something that I'm fighting against. And so he said, because all women were viewed as objects by him, so he said, if they, meaning the Muslims, have taken one person from my community, meaning my sister, I will take one from theirs. So he swore that he would avenge his sister having run away with a Muslim by marrying a Muslim himself. Now, if you think about it, it's really strange that if he sees Muslims as the other, as people to hate, then he is actually punishing himself by wanting to marry someone who he hates. But it's part of this whole story of self loathing. And so he goes about seducing this Muslim woman. And then, this is why I like telling stories about reality, because couldn't possibly make something like this up. I don't have the imagination for it. Then the strangest thing happens. He falls in love with this Muslim woman who he has forcibly kidnapped and married in order to fulfill this pledge that he's made of revenge. He falls in love with her because she's this stunning looking woman that everybody else also covets. And so he thinks that she is this prize that he's won. At the same time, he also hates her. And so she becomes his first victim. And so now, when I've told you this much of the story, you can see how Suresh not only holds up the collective desires of people who were suddenly becoming evangelized and converted to this idea of hate the Muslim, but how this gave his otherwise normalized Gundaism, strong arm tactics in the area that he lived in a higher political purpose. So that is one other story in this spectrum of hate. Now, I just picked random examples of people who would allow me to tell their story. Of course, Suresh didn't allow me to tell his story. I had to get it secondhand from his wife and children because he was in jail. And when he came out of jail on parole briefly, I tried to talk to him, but he attacked me. So I had to get his story secondhand from other people. But I also then said, okay, this is the hard end of the spectrum, if there is a spectrum of hate, from the other story that I described of Pranav, who was at the lighter end of the spectrum and who underwent a transformation. In between these two, there's a third character who I encountered, who I call Dungar in the book, who is a tribal from a tribe, the Bhil tribe in Gujarat. He comes from an economically disadvantaged background. And it is through him that I ask this question of ourselves as people who are looking at the politics of hate and who are engulfed by it. If we want people not to be attracted to this politics of hate, Then in places where, well, in one case, I've explained to you the story of Pranav, who comes from a strong caste background. He's from a dominant caste, he's English speaking, he has a master's degree. He enters it from a different space. Suresh is at this other end where the personal becomes the political, in a very sort of deep, broken, wrenched open sort of way. And then in between these is this character called Dungar, this person called Dungar, who doesn't have a very secure sense of self, because as a tribal surrounded by powerful trading Muslim castes, he is in envy of people who are wealthier than him. He is also looking out for a better, stronger political and social status than what he comes from. Not that there was anything to be ashamed of about being Bhil, but that's how he felt, because his father was an alcoholic, and he ran away from home, stayed in the house of his teacher, his guru, who was upper caste, vegetarian, and someone who was not just God fearing but religious in a way that attracted Dungar and made him feel like, okay, this is a better way to be. And he internalized this to mean that the background that he came from, he conflated the two, that the background I come from and the person that my father is, the reason that my father is a terrible man is because he's Bhil. And so he decides to wrestle with this identity. Who is a Bhil? Why am I tribal? So but he can't get out of it. So he's someone who tries to escape his background and keeps falling back into it. So he's somewhere in the middle, and he then adopts the Sangh Parivar and the ideas of the VHP and the Bajrang Dal, joins their Hindu senas, their cow vigilante groups, their love jihad groups, the destruction of the Ayodhya mosque, which he also is a part of that campaign. He does all of this because he feels that this gives him a better, greater sense of self and a greater acceptance. It eventually gives him better power, status, money. And so, if we want people to not inhabit these spaces, we have to also ask ourselves, what is the alternative available to someone like Dungar in his village? You may say education, getting a job. He did that. He is one of the few tribals in his part of the world who got a bachelor's degree, whereas the rest of his siblings and most of the people in his village dropped out of class 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or maximum class 8. He was this very willful child who his teachers actually said, do not let him drop out of school. His parents forced him to go to school. He not only went to school, he went to college, thinking that that will get him out of the drudgery, get him out of this life of daily wage labor where he is living in a subsistence level economy where he just about makes ends meet, sometimes doesn't make ends meet, lives this very sort of harsh life. He thought that education should get him out of it. But the kind of education available there made him actually go right back to construction labor and farm labor that the rest of his neighbors and his friends were doing in any case without that education. So what did the education get him? Zero, zero. And that brings me to this other large question that examining the insides of the story of hate led me to, which is, what is it that makes it attractive for people like this? It gives people security, it gives them a sense of self, it allows someone like Dungar to take on the Muslims in the area around them who are also xenophobic, who are also inward looking, and who also have a sense of banding together. So let's say someone like Dungar or one of his friends messes around with someone, and that person tends to be happens to be Muslim. Now it's that person versus the Muslim, and then that Muslim has readily access to the larger community, and in 10 minutes an entire section of Muslims comes to support that side. Now when he leans on the Sangh, he also has an army of Hindu troopers who can support him and out maneuver the larger sort of brotherhood of Muslims. And so there are tangible gains for someone like Dungar. Now, for very different reasons, each of these three people that talk to, it's not possible to generalize on the basis of this, that hate is this or hate is that. But what I understood about hate by looking inside it through traveling inside the minds and the social spaces of these three people was that hate is not one thing, it is so many different things. And that if we want to change it, we must first learn to enter this space without looking just at the outer kernel, the voyeurism, the rapes, the crimes, the attacking of people, but look inside the actors of this hate. What is their world made up of? What is making them do this? What are they getting out of it? And what can we give these people instead? And if we don't do this, if we don't allow ourselves to get beyond the voyeurism of stories, whether it is the story of hate, or it is the story of a particular crime, or it is the story of gender violence, of caste violence, if we conflate all of this and just look at the flatten it out by looking at the description of the crime, but not the structural underpinnings of it, and not at the stories, the personal stories and dissonance of the people involved in it, we aren't actually going to get very far. We're going to keep repeating this, and that's what fascinates me about telling stories that have to do with fact. Not just the facts being so bewildering, but that they can lead us to a different place. They can lead us out of the dark if we care to unwrap them one layer by layer and keep the layers and the complexity. That is what I find most gripping and interesting about telling the story, one of the stories of our times, which is the politics of hate. That it is infinitely more complex, but also something that if you look deep inside, you're not just left with this hand wringing. Oh, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Let's get out of here. Let's abandon this space. Let's abandon this country. I think I'm left thinking there's lots to do here. There's lots that one has to work on, and there's mountains of messes that we are part of, and we are part of it in many ways by doing what by not doing what is the more interesting thing to do, which is to not get caught up in the PR that the Sangh Parivar offers us on a plate, saying, "Look at us, we are this hideous thing. Look at us," and then we say, "Yes, you're this hideous thing," and we magnify them and we flatten out the universe, and then we fall precisely inside the space that they want us to fall into. And therefore, I think telling these sorts of stories actually offers us light. It actually can offer us hope. I don't know whether I've succeeded in doing that or if my book has succeeded in doing that, but that's the attempt, that's the journey, that's the reason to write. And I think writing with fact is mostly about trying to not be frightened about the world we live in and trying to find a way to live within it, and trying to understand that you need this kind of imagination, you need an imagination, you need an imagination and an empathy that might be strange and bewildering, but that actually helps you understand the world you live in slightly better and be able to cope with it slightly better and also find ways out of it. I mean, the imagination requires this sort of complexity in order to exist. And I think if there's anything that I have to say about writing, it is this, that it shouldn't leave you more despairing than when you started. It must leave you with things to think about. And if any sort of writing can do that, then that is the most interesting space to occupy for anyone who wants to enter the universe of writing or reading. Thank you.
Ever since I started Anita's Attic, one of the most anticipated literary events for me every year has been the Attic graduation event. This is where the writers who I have been mentoring over a period of 3 months present to you a piece of their writing. And the best thing, of course, is that in most years we've managed to find the chemistry to be able to have a collaborative fiction presentation done. And this year again, we are having a collaborative story presented to you. by the 8 writers who were part of season 10 of Anita's Attic mentorship program. The title of the story that they are presenting is Cry, Baby, Cry. Some days ago, I read somewhere a literary grade saying that art has to be distanced from reality, that good writing doesn't necessarily have to carry the resonance of what is happening around us. In all honesty, I beg to differ. I think art becomes meaningless if it is unable to capture the resonance of the world that we inhabit. That art, what is the point of art, or what is the point of writing? And to me, it is all about being able to help the readers, help the audience, if it is an audiobook, for instance, to be able to look at the world with a slightly different angle, to be able to know how to tilt your head to get a perspective that is uniquely yours and at the same time is laden with empathy and is about being able to see the world as a whole rather than parts that constitute a whole. Cry Baby Cry is a story about our times, the times we live in, especially given the kind of, lockdown plus pandemic plus all the various consequences of these two events happening world over, has had, I would think, an unforgettable impact on the way we think, on the way we live our lives, and even in the way we look at what lies ahead for us, not just as an individual or or a set of individuals, but also for the humankind as a whole. I'm very proud that the 8 writers of season 10 chose to write about something that is not just topical, but is universal and is something that will resonate with anybody listening to it, listening to the story that they are going to present to you. So over to season 10 of Anita's Attic with their production, Cry Baby Cry.
Cry baby cry. Sub-Inspector Sharada Rao sipped the bitter coffee to keep her away. There had been a midnight raid at a prominent city hotel and it had ended in the wee hours. Suddenly, the strident ring of a mobile phone pierced through the dull silence. She jerked and the coffee spilled onto her khaki pants. Cursing under her breath, she wrestled the phone out of her pocket. Hello, hello, yes, this is Brunton Road Police Station. SI Sharada Rao speaking. It was the control room. The crackling at the other end made her wince as she pressed the phone to her ear. Her expression quickly became grave. She pushed aside the dog-eared files and scribbled the information she had just received into a black diary before putting it into her pocket. Her stocky body came alive as she stood up and stretched her neck. She repositioned her cap over her grey bun, stamped her feet, and patted her face belt and shoulder fittings into place. Striding out of her room, she shouted, Ramaya, there has been an accident near BSNL crossing. Tell Gopal to bring the jeep around immediately and inform the 2 constables to be on call. Her subordinates saluted and stood to attention as she hurried past them. Shouting orders over her shoulders, she ran down the steps and flung herself into the front seat of the jeep. Constable Ramaya, breathing hard, scrambled into the back of the jeep with his lathi. The vehicle leapt forward with a siren blaring. They reached the road crossing in 5 minutes and saw that a crowd had already gathered. Confusion prevailed as vehicles blared their horns incessantly and motorcyclists climbed onto the curb as they weaved their way through a crowd of angry pedestrians. Ramaya shouted and pushed his way through the crowds with his lathi to clear the way for S.I. Sharada Rao. What she saw took her breath away. Blood spattered, glass pieces scattered, and the twisted metal remains of what looked like a baby stroller stuck half in and half out under the wheel. Two pale limbs, strangely bent, poked out under the LPJ lorry that tilted at a dangerous angle. There was no chance of survival. The cylinders were hanging precariously from the loosened ropes, and she at once saw that the situation was serious. Chances of explosions were high. She dug out her mobile phone and called her boss, the ACP, urgently. Sharada Rao removed her cap and ventured into the heart of the accident. She peered below the lorry to see the remains of a young woman on her side with rivulets of clotting blood encircling her. The baby stroller was twisted beyond recognition. She could, however, make out the light pink, chubby legs of a baby sticking out. Sharada Rao felt bile reaching up her mouth and stood up. The siren of ambulances could be heard in the distance. Her attention was also drawn to the whining cry of a man pleading for mercy. Two men gripped him by the shoulders while others were abusing him and raining blows. That's enough, she yelled. The police will handle this now.
Raveen's face was swollen, and his head throbbed from the relentless blows the crowd had rained upon him. His mind was in a daze. It had all happened so fast. The woman and stroller had appeared out of nowhere. He had seen the stroller fly into the air upon impact before it disappeared under the truck. He looked around him in dread. "That's enough," the lady in uniform had yelled. "The police will handle this now." Praveen felt the grip on his shoulders ease as the crowd stepped back. A constable approached, lathi in hand, and pulled him to his feet. "Madam, he is the driver of the LPG delivery lorry," the constable said. "Bring him to the jeep for questioning," Sharda Rao replied. "And I want to see his driver's license and delivery permits." 5 minutes later, Praveen was thrown to the ground behind the jeep. Sharda Rao and Ramaya stood before him. "Why don't you have a commercial license?" Sharda Rao asked as she went through his papers. Praveen spoke fast. "I have an LMV license, madam. I didn't have enough money to get a commercial license. It costs 15,000 rupees. Where will I get that money?" "Yes, the lorry has a permit. You can call my boss to verify everything I'm telling you. His name is Madan Kumar. Phone number is 98441 12332. Yes, 12332. Sharda Rao made a note in her black diary. "What happened this morning?" she asked. "Why did you hit that lady?" Beads of sweat formed along Praveen's forehead. "I told you, madam, it was an accident. There was nothing I could do to avoid it. I was heading to the depot in Marathahalli. The signal had just turned green and I began to accelerate along with the rest of the traffic. This woman and her stroller appeared out of nowhere. I tried to swerve to the right as soon as I saw her, but there was a school bus in the other lane. There would have been more casualties if I had hit the school bus, and I would have hit the woman anyway." The constable swung his lathi hard, hitting Praveen on the shoulder. "A woman and her baby are dead because of you," he said. "Why didn't you pay attention to the road?" "Ah, don't beat me," Praveen screamed. "Believe me, sir, there is nothing I could have done. Yes, I slammed on the brakes as soon as I saw them. I swear on my mother's life." He began to sob. "Why would someone cross a road when the traffic was moving? Are you sure the light was green?" "We are going to get the CCTV footage from this morning. We will put you through third-degree torture if what you tell us doesn't match what we see in the footage. Tell us the truth. Were you jumping a red light?" "I swear, sir, the light was green. She was the one who came onto the road the moment I started. It was almost as though someone pushed her. It all happened so fast." "No, I don't recall seeing an altercation. A beggar? No, I don't remember seeing any beggar. I was focused on the road." "So what happened after you hit her?" Sharda Rao asked. "There were so many people everywhere, madam. They pulled me out of the truck and beat me. They forced me to my knees in front of the lady's body. It was horrible. They held me there until the police and ambulance arrived. The children in the school bus were all staring at me, pointing. I can still hear their screams. He paused and then asked, Did did the baby make it, madam? I can't bear the thought. Sharda Rao stared at him coldly. The baby is dead, she said. Praveen was weeping uncontrollably now. Sharda Rao turned to Ramaya. Handcuff him and put him in the jeep for further interrogation, she said.
My name is Ratan. I am a guard at JKI Play School. I have been working here for the past 3 years. This is the first time something so horrible has happened here. I actually saw it happening. Her head exploding like a watermelon. What can I say, ma'am? Can you describe how the accident happened? Pressed Sub-Inspector Sharda. Ratan dashed off the tears from his eyes. He controlled himself and described what he had seen. There is a lot of chaos on the road with school buses pulling up and children getting off. The gates open at 8 am sharp and shut at 8:05 am. This is as per headmistress ma'am's strict instructions. I was waiting to open the gate and I saw this lady step off the footpath with the stroller. The kid was really young, a baby really. Did you see the baby? No, madam. The hood was down, so I could only see the legs. This lady always came punctually with her baby. As I watched, a beggar who normally sat on the footpath was right behind her. I actually saw him pushing her. The stroller bumped onto the road and the lady rushed forward to catch it, not realizing that the red light had turned green. You know the rest, ma'am. The LPG truck knocked her down and the stroller went under the wheel. The lady's head hit the ground so hard, it exploded. There was a terrible sound as the truck driver tried to stop the vehicle. A few cylinders also rolled off. The guard stood wiping his eyes. Can you describe the beggar who pushed her? Oh, ma'am, he is a dirty fellow in rags. Long hair, all knotted up. Ratan makes a distasteful face. I saw him push her. Maybe he was trying to snatch her bag. Where did he go afterwards? I don't know, ma'am. I rushed to help the woman. What could I do? She was bleeding. I think she was already dead. Do you remember anything unusual about this lady? Said Sub-Inspector Sharda. Ratan stood thinking for a few seconds. Yes, ma'am. Yesterday, she was shouting like anything at the daycare ayah. I don't know what the problem was. She accused the ayah of not looking after the baby properly. A mosquito had bitten the kid. Thank you, Ratan. Ratan stood with his hands pressed into a namaste. If that beggar is seen around here, give us a call immediately, said Sub-Inspector Sharda to Ratan. We must catch that crook. I will, answered Ratan and saluted the Sub-Inspector. Thank you.
That afternoon, in the police station, Sunil Agarwal put his hands to his face and wept openly. Across the table from him, Sub-Inspector Sharda Rao looked on kindly. Today has been a very difficult day for you, Mr. Agarwal, she said. But time is of the essence. Rian is missing and the first 24 hours are crucial. We could all help find Rian if you would recount the events of this morning to us. Her tone was sympathetic and yet authoritative. Sunil wiped his eyes with his kerchief and looked up. His eyes were red. I'll try, ma'am, he said. Like most nights, we had a disturbed sleep because of Rian. He's quite colicky, and so at 11 o'clock, Manisha took him to the second bedroom so that I could get some sleep. I have a board meeting today. Yes, I work at IBM at Anita'sAttic Park. I head their systems development lab. I could hear Rian crying when I awoke at 6:30. I entered the other room and saw that he was alone on the edge of the bed. And, well, it was strange because Manisha hadn't put any pillows around him. He's too little to crawl, but he's starting to roll over. And she would never risk him getting hurt. I went to the living room and saw that she was asleep on the couch. No, madam, she's not on any medication. Well, she had a sleepless night, right? Anyways, I changed Rian's diaper and took him to the living room. He was hungry, and I gave him to Manisha to feed and then went to get ready. I left the house at 8:30 a.m. Yes, Manisha was awake by then. She had a therapy session at 10. No, madam, she is a therapist. Her office is next to Garuda Mall. Yes, on Magrat Road. Manisha had fired Rian's nanny 2 weeks ago, and we were in the process of finding a daycare for him so that Manisha could go back to work. It's manageable even though he's young. Manisha is very organized. Oh God, I cannot believe she's gone. And now you tell me you cannot find my son. Oh God. Well, I was at work when I got the call. Somebody had asked me to identify a body at Manipal Hospital. I couldn't go alone. I told my sister and brother-in-law to meet me there. My brother-in-law identified her. I could not get myself to see her. My sister broke the news to Manisha's family. They are landing this evening. Did you notice anything unusual about Manisha this morning? Sharda asked. I can't think of anything, ma'am. Well, she was a bit distracted. Perhaps she was anxious about her first therapy session. I know she snapped at me a few times when I was looking after the baby. She was always very meticulous about his care. That's why we fired our nanny last week. Meanwhile, our maid is on leave, so our apartment is a mess. This has always bothered Manisha. We share household duties, but I skipped them yesterday. Anything else? One other thing. Manisha received a phone call around midnight. She was in the bathroom and her voice was muffled, and so I don't know who she was speaking with or what was being said. But she sounded agitated. I didn't want to speak to her then. She has enough going on. Had enough going on. I was planning on speaking with her this evening. I think it was that bastard father of hers. Excuse my language, but he's crazy. They've never been close and he's always harassing her. He expects me to finance his lifestyle. Anyways, it doesn't matter now. One of our clients has also been having issues. Anu somebody? Recently, she's been messaging and calling Manisha at all hours of the day. Manisha spent a lot of time with her. In fact, Manisha was scheduled to meet her at 10 this morning. Sharda Rao made a few notes in her black diary and looked up. We found a CCTV footage of the scene of the accident. It appears that Manisha may have been pushed in the way of oncoming traffic. It may have been an harmless incident or something more sinister. We are looking at all angles. Is it possible that someone would want to take the child away from her? I cannot believe this. You mean to say my wife was murdered? Who is that bastard? Did you find him? Yes, we have arrested an LPG truck driver and a beggar as possible suspects. Then why are you wasting your time with me? You should be beating confessions out of those two men. Have you even interrogated them? Calm down, Mr. Agarwal, Sharda Rao said. Her voice raised. Do not tell me to calm down. Do your job and go get confessions out of those two bastards. They killed my wife and kidnapped my son. A few minutes later, as he sat behind the steering wheel of his car, Sunil Agarwal reflected on the last few days. Manisha had been perfect, even though their marriage was not. She had been stressed ever since Rian came into their lives. She did bring the stress upon herself, though. She wanted to be able to do everything perfectly. Manisha was perfect, but the strain was showing in their marriage. Sunil had read that it's normal for new mothers to be agitated and irritable, and so he tried to be as patient as he could with her. Manisha was also keen to get back to her work. She'd always been independent. She was an amazing woman. Oh God, Sunil wept. I'll miss her so much.
Client Miss Anurita, read by Jyoti. Mommy, 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 called the personalized ringtone in my mobile. I had recorded the voice of my little girl. But for the efforts of my therapist, I would never have enjoyed the summons of my little one every time the mobile rang. I answered the call. An unfamiliar voice asked me whether I was Miss Anurita. When I confirmed that I was, she introduced herself to me. I'm Sub-Inspector Sharda Rao, she said. You must have heard the news by now. Manisha is no more. She passed away yesterday in a road accident. I understand you had a 10 a.m. appointment with her? I was silent. I had heard the news. Yes, and she has never been late in the past, so I knew something was off. You can say I had a feeling, but since she was just coming out of maternity leave, I thought something must have cropped up with the baby. That's why I didn't call her. To be honest, I never thought she'd be back to work so soon. Why not? 3 months is a little short for maternity leave, don't you think? I couldn't leave my baby for a year and a half, quit my job, and don't regret it. When did you make this appointment? I cleared my throat. What was I supposed to tell the police? That the therapist had called me almost at midnight to make sure I confirm my slot, and that she had been quite distraught? I had been shocked by her unexpected call. She had sounded disturbed and disoriented. How are you doing? How is Anika? She had asked. Listen, you're avoiding therapy and that's never a good sign. Let's fix a time now to do this as soon as possible. I was troubled by Manisha's call. She had never called me at midnight ever. The first few months after my little girl's birth, I had gone crazy and I had sought Manisha's help. It struck me that this was perhaps her way of keeping in touch with her work. She was very dedicated. And for the first time, I would be able to help her with tidbits on child rearing. Gosh, who was the therapist here? I certainly had more hands-on experience than her in parenting. That's why I didn't mind this call so late at night. There was a pause. Then she spoke softly. It's the baby, you know. I guess I didn't expect motherhood to be so demanding. It'll only be difficult for a few years. Then it gets better. Every single day. I tried consoling her, but I could hear from her voice that she wasn't convinced. He just doesn't sleep. The only time he sleeps is when he's hanging onto my breast. And then I can't get any sleep. If I remove my breast, the slightest noise or movement wakes him up and he starts wailing. Then I put him back on my breast and he falls asleep. But then I don't even dare to breathe, mind you, in case the damn fellow wakes up. It's not easy, I murmured. God, and my breast feels so sore. But ignore me, Anurita. Thanks for listening to me. I'll be okay. I'll see you at the clinic tomorrow, right? Are you sure? You don't want to take more time off? Oh, I'm fine. I know you need me with Jay's travels. It can't be easy. I can wait. I stared at the phone for a long time, not knowing how to respond. Sub-Inspector Sharda's voice brought me back to the present. Miss Anurita, when did you make an appointment with Manisha? Yesterday, I suppose. She's been messaging me for the last few weeks, asking me to fix a date. But yesterday is when we confirmed the day. And if you don't mind me asking, you were seeking help with? Oh, I have some ongoing issues with my husband. Manisha referred me to another therapist while she was away. But we didn't really get along. Yet she seemed eager to treat you again. I nodded. She was a very good therapist, very involved in her work with me. Maybe she felt more in control when she worked. Work becomes a respite, Inspector, for mothers. I'm sure you know that. There is no escape from motherhood, is there? And especially now, when we live as nuclear families with no elders to help. Inspector Sharda ended the interview, and I grieved that Manisha would never get a chance to regain her health and cuddle a Baba, that she would never watch him crawl, take his first step, utter his first word.
I was talking to my sister on my mobile when the police came. Seri Akka, let me call you back. Someone is here. I placed a dupatta over my kaftan and opened the door. Yes? Yes, sir, my name is Kalavati. A few questions. What is the matter? A constable stood at the door, towering over me. His badge was at my eye level. I read his name, P.V. Ramaiah. How many years have you been living here? He asked. How many years? It's my mother's house, so since I was a baby. Yes, I was married. My husband was a drunkard. Died years ago, left me nothing. The constable pushed his way into the house. He didn't bother taking off his shoes. Expensive, he commented, running his fingers over the television my son had gifted me. How can you afford this? I could feel the heat rise on my face. I have a job. Can a maid afford this? I resisted the urge to slap his oily face. I was a baby nanny, sir, and I have a son who supports me. He's a computer engineer. The constable looked unimpressed. And why did you stop working? I didn't know what had happened at that time, of course. That's why I kept blabbering. I am no longer a young woman, sir. Looking after children is hard work. I chose to stop working. He eyed me dubiously. I heard you were fired. That's when I should have known something was wrong. But I was too nervous to think straight. The constable trampled all over the room with his muddy boots. So what happened between you and Manisha Agarwal? Was there a fight? A fight? No, not a fight. An argument, I suppose. The baby, Ryan, he was a difficult one. Always crying, teething pain, stomach pain, constant diarrhea, latching issues. He was a sickly child, but I think she made him sicker. Who? I sighed. His mother. Always worrying about him, about his health, about her milk supply. She never let the child be. I tried telling her. Did you have arguments with her? Who am I to fight, sir? Sometimes the baby would be crying and crying, but she would refuse to feed him. Refuse? She would sit in her room alone, staring at the wall with a doll in her arms. A doll? I could hear the constable's tone change. What doll? Oh, just this plastic doll someone had gifted Rayan. It was strange. She would hold the doll and cuddle it more often than Rayan. I would beg her to take the child, that he was hungry. She told me that Rayan was choosing not to latch. Choosing. Can you believe it? I said he was a baby. It would take him some time to learn. She told me to get lost, but Rayan wouldn't stop crying. I tried to pacify him, but he was hungry. And so then one day, Sir's sister visited. She said enough was enough and went to the chemist down the road and got a box of Similac milk powder. I was scared at first. Manisha, madam, never let me touch formula. I'd asked her many times. But this time, Sir's sister made the bottle herself, and I fed him. I've never seen a baby finish a bottle so fast. He calmed down. He even gurgled with laughter. He was just a hungry baby. Then that evening, I was feeding him again when she... What? Asked the constable. She, Manisha madam, she saw me with the bottle. I've never seen anyone so angry. She snatched the baby from me, took away his bottle, and put him in the cot. He immediately started crying. I begged her to let me feed him, but she was so angry I thought she'd hit me. She told me to leave and never come back again. And when was the last time you saw Rayan? The constable asked. This is when I got alarmed. The last time? 10 days ago, after the formula incident. Madam never let me come back. I tried calling her the next day, but is Rayan all right?
I always keep my phone on mute. It's a condition, adrenal fatigue. And so even the slightest sound startles me. I entered the kitchen around 11 a.m. to cook a late breakfast. I was groggy despite sleeping for a good 7 hours. My phone, which lay by the wicker basket on the kitchen counter, vibrated like a kid stomping his feet to get attention. I picked up the phone to hear my brother's voice, rushed, frantic. Where are you? I've called you 4 times already. Is he with you? I'm at home. Who is with me? Is Rian with you? Rian? Why would I have Rian? My brother seemed to find a reason to accuse me of things I was not guilty of, a pattern from our childhood. I could hear him breathe heavily. He spoke after a considerable pause. There's been an accident. Manisha, a truck. What? What do you mean? Where is Rian? Where are you? She didn't make it. Rian is missing. And now they're saying it may not be an accident. We don't have all the details yet. I'm at the police station, Brunton Road. My brother could be stoic when in pain. I'm coming over, I said. Before I could finish the statement, he hung up. I sat down to breathe and take all this in. I had spoken to Manisha just a couple of days ago. We weren't close, but I liked her. She made my brother very happy, which is a task. She was always warm and welcoming. But she's had so much on her plate constantly. She'd been going through a lot since the baby was born. I remember when I went with her for Rian's first immunization. A new mother held her baby, cooing in maternal affection, while we sat in the reception room. Aren't they precious? Like little bundles of joy, the new mother said. I could see the pride in her eyes. My sister-in-law made a sour face, shrugging her shoulders. Bundle of tears, she murmured. I looked at her in surprise and could see the other mother also looked alarmed. Manisha shrugged. It's true, isn't it? It takes a lot of effort. Sleepless nights, colic, feeding, swaddling, cleaning, bathing, a never-ending cycle. Nobody talks about it. But when we do everything and they sleep or play with us, it seems worth it. Unfortunately, this brat doesn't sleep as much, she added playfully. She never once called me about the baby though. One night, I remember I dropped by to drop something Sunil wanted. I could see she was in near tears, but she never admitted it. I don't think she allowed Sunil to help enough, or at all. I consoled her the best I could, but she always said that she would manage. And even I wasn't sure if things got better. I did not have the heart to tell her of my struggles with a 14-year-old. Motherhood is a mental disease, a helpless condition of wretched love.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm reading out a conversation between the police and Mrs. Srinivas, who is Manisha's neighbor. Shh, Amma will be back soon. What else do I tell him? He has been crying like this from 10:20 a.m. I remember the time because it was this time between my Priyamanathori serial. Poor child. I think it must have been around the same time. You know, they say kids can sense these things. Yes, she came to me around 7 o'clock with the kid. I was quite surprised. We have never talked that much. I've seen her multiple times strutting around in her high heels and ponytails. She always looks so sure of herself. I used to be in awe of her. But all of this was until Baba was born. Baba is very fussy. Even I have woken up multiple times during wee hours because of his bawling. Just imagine her situation. People these days want everything. They just don't compromise. No, I know it is a good thing, but how can you have it all? She said she was going to the clinic today. Can you imagine? It's only been few months after the delivery. In our time, this was the only time a woman was not expected to do anything. Food, massages, sleep, Everything was provided. Just look at her now, leaving her newborn with an absolute stranger and going to work. See, I'm a progressive woman and all. I get feminism, but just this is little too much. I had to tell her the same when she came in the morning today. I wonder why her family isn't there in this crucial time in her life. Only her sister visits. I've seen her parents very few times. No Simantam, no Valaikappa. All of these traditions are important. No, it's not just absurdity. Just look at this puny kid. My parent was at least double his weight at this age. Something must be wrong with her milk. And my Lakshmi, she was radiant. I fed her with special kungumapoo and goat milk daily. This is a time a woman needs her mother. I think she had a love marriage or something. Now that is the fashion, no? No one wants parents or their opinions. The husband guy, he seemed decent. What was his name? Yeah, Sunil. I have not talked with him all so much. Poor guy. I don't know how he will take care of the kid alone now. But he's way better than the men in our times. My Lakshmi would have died if I had left her with my husband when she was a toddler. I have seen Sunil help her with cleaning and all that. No, I've never seen him hit her and all. But, I've heard some fighting sounds lately. So about today, so Manisha came with the kid. She gave me this bag, a long schedule. Here, just look at this. Every minute is accounted for. Just look at this list, madam. She expects me to do all of this. A stranger, crazy, right? I do not know what to say only. These young parents are just so sure of themselves. I get lost in their big words. But when she handed over the list today, the one thing I noticed was she looked so confident and put together after a long time. More like her old self, not the tired new mom. I thought it must be because she was getting back to her old normal. She was getting back to work again, she was independent again, she was writing again. Yeah, writing. I saw her scribbling furiously in her notes when she brought the baby down to the common area. And even in this morning. Shh, Kanna, Amma will be back home soon.
Therapist Diary, June 30th, 2022. We all read about motherhood in development psychology class, and I still remember the first time I heard about stitches on my vagina and how the thought scared me. Here I am today with 8 stitches on it, nursing a baby that wants to bite into my boobs rather than suck them. But he plays with my hair to soothe himself. He is cute. With all the pain he causes, he is cute. June 7, 2022. How dare Kalavati feed him formula? That processed dirty thing. How fucking dare she? That idiot thinks she knows better. I'm teaching Rian to self-soothe. It's called the extinction model. And for her tiny brain, it's called cry it out. Read a damn book. Bloody twat. I want him to be independent. I want him to be a cut over the rest. I know what I'm doing. I am his mother, goddammit. What makes me angrier is that Sunil also thinks she's right. I am shaking with anger. I need to get this out in here before I go see Rian. He senses when I am upset. He just doesn't stop crying. No. I need to come. July 19, 2022. I spent 3 hours looking at happy babies on Instagram today. I don't understand why Rian has been crying today. He needs a feed constantly. My back, my arms, my boobs hurt. I can't pee without pain. I can't change my pad without him crying bloody murder. Baba the doll keeps me sane with a perfect cooing and mama calls. I should read up on crying babies and what that means. I think Winnicott wrote some excellent books on it. I don't even remember where I kept it now. Is it possible for him to know my thoughts? Maybe I should book a session with my therapist. But he's male, he won't understand. Maybe I should look for a new therapist. Wait, what if word gets out? What if other therapists know about me being sick? What if they stop sending me clients? This Instagram and cancel culture is scary. No. I can't risk it. I'm just overthinking it. Sunil is right. When I don't sleep, I spiral way too much. This is just my anxiety talking. I should just go check his diaper. He's sleeping. Should I risk waking him up? But what time is it? Why is he sleeping during playtime? August 2nd, 2022. Sunil fought with me today again. He couldn't come at bath time. Work, it seems. He just doesn't get why it's essential to follow his schedule. This 10-15 minute delay puts the entire schedule off track. This is not the only problem, it also affects his sense of safety. I keep telling him Rian should not be hearing us fight. He will not develop secure attachment. I need him to feel safe. All this fighting is going to affect his psychological development. He doesn't get how many years the effect of this can last. I know I deal with this trauma at work. I can't be the one making the same mistakes as my client's parents or my parents. He just needs to listen to me. I know what I'm doing here. Look at how well Anurita and her baby girl are doing only because she listened to me. Maybe if I do a session with Anurita, it might bring me hope that I can do this. If I can help others, I can do it for myself too. I just need to see it, and it might help me and Rian. Wait, will it be unethical? Maybe. Let me try and frame it in a safe way. Can't make it obvious. August 11, 2022. Today his poop was greyish yellow and it smelled off. Is he sick? Is it the formula that Idiot gave him? Let me feed him more today. I have read that milk has anti-infection properties. It will also get that processed crappy formula out of him. August 25th, 2022. I need to start work. Papa has been asking for money. He never has enough. And Sunil refuses to help him. I need to hide this from Sunil. If I do 8 sessions this week, I might be able to make enough for him for the time being. I don't want to dip into my savings. This pregnancy has been expensive. And Papa is too old to work. If only he had listened to me about not spending that shit ton on the wedding and gifts, he would have sufficient for his retirement. I still feel angry at Sunil and his parents for all those demands. September 1, 2022. I was reading about how trauma works between generations. Was it a good idea to have Rian right after the pandemic? The pandemic anxiety has changed Sunil and me to some degree. We take care of our health as much as possible, but research is now showing that anxiety affects DNA. What if we make him anxious like me? September 7, 2022. What the hell? Bangalore is totally submerged underwater. We've had no water or electricity for the past 2 days, and Rian is broken into hives, and I can't even take him to the hospital. I'm worried about my clinic. Will it survive? I can't even go see it. My books, my furniture is going to be damaged. This was not the right time to have it at all. What world will he grow up in, where rains get you marooned, where cities, countries, and millions of people are dying due to climate change? Each season is killing humans. We shouldn't have had him. This is not right. We're going to mess him up. If it's not us, the world is going to mess him up. This is just not right. Dear Sunil, this is your to-do list for 20th September 2022. 1. You do not have access to my work files. I've set the laptop in a way that it will erase all information if you enter the wrong password after 3 attempts. 2. You need to pay my office rent and pay the maid for the next 2 months before giving it up. 3. All my insurance and related documents are in the top left drawer of the cupboard with pink stars on it. In our bedroom, middle wardrobe. Make sure Dad gets the payout for ICICI Bank, and you and Rian will get HDFC Bank. Keep the money for his education. He needs to go to Stonehill in Bangalore, Dunes or Sahyadri. These schools are the best in India right now. And after that, college in USA. This is my contribution. 4. Hire Kalavati again. Rian needs a safe, familiar face. She already fed him formula and he seems to like it. 5. Follow his schedule. He needs predictability after all of this. 6. He likes to listen to Baby Shark when you sing it to him. Read Spindy Spider's story to him once a month. It's his favorite book so far. His playlist is on Spotify. Just ask Alexa to play Rian's playlist. His storybook is on the corner shelf in his room next to Moi the cow. 7. I have 7 books you have to read and some other recommendations to help you manage grief and loss, along with single dad self-help books and child developmental books. They're all kept in the shelf next to our TV in the bedroom with post-its on it. There's Zappis in the bedside drawer that might help you calm down. And so will the melatonin gummies. Use them judiciously. 8. I made a terrible mistake at work and then I blamed it on Rian. I'm a terrible mother. I'm not a good fit for Rian. He will suffer if I continue to nurse him. I don't want that. He's at an age where he will not remember. So it won't affect him now or later. But the more I stay with him, the more it will impact him. I have put 3 very important research papers under your mattress cover. Read them after the police have gone. 9. Do not let anyone see this email after you have read it. Delete it from your inbox and then from the bin. If they find it, you won't get insurance. They don't give insurance for death by suicide. So I'm making sure it looks like an accident. Tell Rian I love him. Never ever let him know the truth about my death. 11. I love you.